Okay, let's get started. Good morning, men. I had something happen over the last couple of weeks. Actually, I had several things happen over the last couple of weeks. I want to tell you about a couple of them. This is a heavily disguised story, but it's nobody you know. I have been reaching out to a man, sharing with him for about 10 years. And so recently he had a severe health problem. As I say, it's nobody you know, but he had a severe health problem, and his wife had to go out of town. So she asked me if I would check in with her husband while she was away. And so I thought, what a wonderful opportunity to reach out. So I told my wife, Patsy, about it, and she made this guy a meatloaf from this famous restaurant up in Savannah called Lady and Sons. Incredible piece of meatloaf. And so I went down one afternoon when his wife was away to check on him because she was worried. And it happened to be sprinkling. So I knocked on the door. There was no answer. I looked inside. The television was on. And so I started freaking out, thinking that, maybe the guy was in trouble. Well, as it turns out, I went to another door, and sure enough, he answered. And I'm standing there in the rain. And I have this meatloaf, and I'm there to reach out. And I'm there to check on him and see how he's doing. And so I give him the meatloaf, and I inquire about his health and how he's doing, and we stand there for about 3 or 4 minutes visiting, and it's sprinkling. And finally, a large raindrop hits my glasses and sort of dribbles down right in front of my pupil, and he says, "Oh, you're getting wet." And it was about that time I figured, I don't think he's going to invite me in. So I said, "Well, yeah, I am getting wet, so okay, well, I guess I'll be going now." I don't think I'll be taking meatloaf to him anytime again soon. And I just couldn't help but laugh all the way home. Literally, I laughed out loud all the way home. You're trying to do some good deed, some good work for somebody. Show them some kindness. And a lot of times you really get rebuffed, even when you're doing something that is way above and beyond. And so that was one thing. Say it again. So that was one thing that happened over the last couple of weeks. Then earlier this week, it just seems like things kind of have been building up. One guy's been hammering me on something. I mean, he's called the office. He's writing me letters, just kind of hammering me on something. It's not related to anything about the Bible study. It's just that, he's a guy that I knew out of the past, and I'm finite. I mean, I can't do everything. I'm just finite, and you are too, and so you have this in your work. And so I made a choice that I would have somebody else contact him. He's highly offended by that, blah, blah, blah. So that's going on, and then usually, you come out of the summer in a ministry in a cash flow crunch. Well, we're going into the summer with a cash flow crunch. And so I'd like to say, I'm trusting the Lord, and I think I am, but I'm anxious about it. I'm worried. And so I actually found myself signing an email earlier this week. I signed it to an associate at the office. I signed it, me, comma, a somewhat weary but not discouraged warrior. And, that's how I was thinking of myself. I'm a warrior. I am. And you are too. I'm a warrior. But it's wearisome. It's wearisome. This week, later on, as I've been preparing this message, something has happened to me that has deeply encouraged me through the study of this text. And so this message today is for a man who has been, you've been putting out, you've been giving away. You're a warrior, but maybe you have become a little weary yourself. Maybe you're somewhat weary. This is a message for guys who are warriors, but who nevertheless, for whatever reason, are a little weary today. We're going to be looking at 2 Samuel chapter 9. The title of the talk today is Remembering Your Friends, and here's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at David performing an act of extreme kindness. And then we're going to look at how that points us to Christ. And then we're going to look at the practice of kindness. And I've never done this, but I'm going to teach you a Hebrew word today because it's such a rich word, it almost defies the ability to translate it into any other language. And that is this word. It's the practice of Hesed, H-E-S-E-D. Sometimes you see a C in front of it, C-H-E-S-E-D, because those are the American, or the English versions of it. It's actually a Hebrew word, and the first character in the Hebrew word is known as a guttural. All the sounds that we make, well, except when we're going, or something like that, all the sounds we make as Americans, we make with our mouths. But gutturals are sounds that you make with your throat. You know, there are some languages where sounds actually are made in the throat. And so the Americanized version of this word would be hesed or kesed, but the Jewish version, how many people speak Hebrew or know how to say this word in the original language? Anybody? Shalom, huh? Okay. Yeah, shalom to you too, baby. But I'm going to teach you how to say this word. And you say it with your throat. You go, it's like the CH in Bach, but you say it in your throat. So you don't say Bach, you say Bach. Okay? So the first letter of this word is, so everybody do it. Say, some of you feel better now. Okay? Everybody got it? Say it again. Let's go. So it's chesed. Chesed. Say it. Chesed. Chesed. All right. Gosh, this is really pitiful. Now I know why I've never done this before. Okay, but you've got it. That's the word, and that is the word that in the Bible is translated kindness, loving kindness, goodness, mercy, love. In fact, in the Old Testament, God's chesed is the same thing as, or at least one commentator would say, it's the Old Testament reflex for the New Testament phrase, God is love. It is part of the essence of God's character. And it is so yeasty and so rich that I even hesitate to use one word to describe it. And that's why I'm showing you the word, the concept. It's in the Old Testament like 248 times. And about half of those occurrences are actually in the book of Psalms. And so in your versions, when you see words like, you would actually have to see, you'd probably have to look up the words in like a Strong's Concordance to see if it was really this word. But whenever you see unfailing love in the NIV, it's probably this word that's being used. Many places in the King James, it's mercy or goodness. And I'm going to show you a couple places today besides 2 Samuel chapter 9 where this word takes place. Okay, so that kind of just sets it up a little bit. let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 9. And I want to show you an act of extreme kindness, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about just why this is so encouraging to me this week and why I think it can be encouraging to you as well. David has now consolidated his kingdom as the king of Israel, and he asks, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? In some previous chapters, Jonathan, who is the son of Saul, the king, the bad king, Jonathan and David develop a deep friendship, an incredible relationship. And as they part company, they actually make a covenant. And Jonathan asks David if he will show chesed to him and to his family when he becomes the king. And asks David to even make a covenant to show this kindness to him and to his family forever. And so here we are now, who knows how many years down the road, when Saul's empire fell, Mephibosheth was being evacuated by a nurse who happened to drop him when he was 5 years old. Dropped him. They were fleeing for their lives, and his nurse dropped him. And he became lame, crippled in both legs as a result of that at the age of 5. And so that's in the text and in a previous text. And I think I might have put in your questions where you can find it. If I didn't, it's 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4. That describes what I just said. And so now here we are, and this boy, Mephibosheth, he's had everything stripped away. His grandfather, who was the king, saw he's lost everything. His grandfather is killed in battle. His dad is killed in battle. He's crippled, and so we have no idea where he's been and what's been going on in his life. But we have the suspicion, today, when a man loses his father today, usually he's 5 times more likely to grow up in poverty. So we don't really know where this boy has been, but now here we are, many years later. So this happened when he's 5. He's probably now maybe 15, 18, 20 years old. We don't know. But it's a dozen or so years later, and David asks, is there anyone I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake? Verse 2. Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They called him to appear before David, and the king asked him, are you Ziba? And your servant, he replied. And then the king asked, is there no one still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show God's chesed? If there was somebody here who could really speak Hebrew, they would probably tell you I'm grossly mispronouncing that. But anyway, chesed. Say it. Chesed. And notice, he said it in verse 1. Is there anyone to whom I can show kindness? Chesed. And then again here in verse 3, and anyone to whom I can show not just chesed, but God's kindness. Ziba answered the king, there is still a son of Jonathan, and he's crippled in both feet. Where is he? The king asked, and Ziba said, he is at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lodebar. So King David had him brought from Lodebar, from the house of Machir, son of Ammiel. And when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed to pay him honor. Remember, he's the grandson of this man's biggest enemy. David said, Mephibosheth, your servant, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you the chesed. Say it. I will show you chesed. For the sake of your father, Jonathan, I will restore to you. Watch this. This is an act of unrequired, unrequested, undeserved, unmerited, unconditional, unilateral, incomprehensible, extreme kindness. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul. Can you imagine how many vineyards, how many sheep pastures, how many buildings, how many cities that the king of Israel would have owned? Unbelievable wealth. This boy, this young man, he goes probably from a state of despairing poverty to extreme wealth, just like that. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. So not only is he going to give him wealth, but he also, as we'll see in a moment, he actually is going to essentially adopt Mephibosheth as his own son, the son of his friend Jonathan. And look at the way Mephibosheth responds. In verse 8, he bows down and says, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" So I was speculating about the conditions in which he had lived. This is why I speculated that way. He thought of himself as a dead dog, just a dead dog. And then the king summons Ziba and put him in charge, him and his sons, put him in charge of taking care of Mephibosheth's wealth. And then he says at the end of verse 10, "And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Verse 11, and then Ziba said, "Your servant will do whatever the king commands." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. He became like one of the king's sons. Unbelievable that somebody would do such an incredible act of kindness. And so the question that's been bouncing around in my mind is, why would David do this? What would possibly motivate him to do it? Even if Mephibosheth had been aware of David's covenant with his father Jonathan, not in his wildest imagination would he have ever even considered that David would make this kind of gift to him, to restore all of his grandfather's empire, business empire, and to actually essentially adopt him as his own son. Well, why would David do that? Why would you do that? Why would somebody do that for you? Do you think somebody would do that for you? Do you think you might do that for somebody else? Why would David do that? He did it because he's a man after God's own heart. He did it because he had just received chesed from God. After 20 years, the kingdom has been consolidated. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at the incredible blessing where God says, I took you out of the pasture. I made you the king. I will give you rest. I will make your name great. I will do this. I will do that. And David's saying, who am I, sovereign Lord, that you would show me this kindness? So he has been the recipient of this. And you know what I was thinking about this week? As I was having my little pity party, I started thinking about God's chesed in my life. Some of the things that I thought of. I thought back to how God spared me from bankruptcy. I spent 7 years of my life trying to recover from the collapse of my business after the Tax Reform Act of 1986. Frankly, most of my buddies went ahead and declared bankruptcy, and 12 months later, they were back in business. But I was still slogging through all of these problems for like 7 years. But that was what I felt like God was leading me to do, was not to necessarily be spared, but to do everything I could to be spared. And I spent 7 years of my life with one goal, and that was to take care of these financial issues. And He spared me. He did. And I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten that temporarily. I hadn't thought about that in a while. How about you? I mean, where has God been sparing you? Where is His chesed in your life? And then I thought of another one. I thought about how graciously God brought the gospel back into my family line through my wife's family line. How I grew up in a Christian family that didn't know Christ, if that makes any sense to you. And then I met Patsy, and she had Christ in her life, and she was a light. And how God brought the gospel back into my family line through her family line. Hey, my grandfather's name is Christian. My great-grandfather's name is Christian. And I was just thinking, what incredible loving kindness that was of God to bring the gospel back into my family line. And then I thought about how God had allowed me the privilege of, when my parents both passed away 2 years ago, that they passed away confessing faith in Jesus Christ. And how I have a deceased brother who also confessed faith in Jesus Christ. And I have another brother who has received the Lord. And I have one brother left to go. And I even see signs of God's loving kindness as he seems to be warming up a little bit, very little bit, to that. And then I was thinking about how God allowed me, I didn't start out in my young adult life a very pleasant person. I was angry. I was moody. I was filled with self-pity. I was selfish. I was ambitious. I was overly aggressive. I would step on you, whether or not you'd stepped on me. If it was convenient, I would step on you. And over the last couple of weeks, things have changed. Now, I'm going back a few years, but I didn't know what normal behavior was. I just didn't know what normal, especially in business, didn't know what normal business behavior was. And I was thinking how God put this amazing woman in my life. And she's not perfect. She's not perfect. She's almost perfect, but she's not perfect. And yet I was even thinking this week of all the many times, of all the stupid little, petty little, tiny, insignificant, inconsequential things that I have allowed to become bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of blow them way out of proportion, completely out of proportion, for this incredible, amazing woman that God has given me. But this week I was reminded of God's hesed, His kesed, His chesed, in giving me this amazing woman. And how I have two grown children walking with the Lord, serving the Lord, a second career, a ministry of actually being able to help people connect with Jesus Christ. I mean, it's been incredible. And so this text, it's worth rereading, and just to think about, how have I been given this loving kindness. I was a cripple, like Mephibosheth. You're probably a cripple too. I was a dead dog. It was undeserved. It was unrequired. It was unrequested. It was unmerited. It was unconditional. Mephibosheth didn't do anything. And so, what Hesed does is that it points us to Christ. You know, David was a type of Christ. He was a Messiah. He was an anointed one. In fact, it's out of his bloodline that Jesus himself is born. He's the forerunner of Christ. He's a type of Christ. It's maybe a small c, okay, but a type of Christ. And he shows us, he's an exemplar. He shows us how God bestows his chesed on cripples. We're like Mephibosheth. I'm like him at least. I suspect you are too. Sometimes you feel like you're a dead dog. And you've got a limp. And then it's just out of nowhere, or seemingly out of nowhere, but it's not out of nowhere, but it's because of this incredible love that God has for those who confess his name. This goodness, this mercy, this loving kindness that he has. That he just takes care of us. He just takes care. He's just taking care of you. In spite of all the little itsy-bitsy things that are going on this week, and maybe some big things, when we think about our lives, he's taken care of us. Hasn't he? Jesus is the keeper of the generations. He shows his love to thousands, from generation to generation. He connected David. What he did was he took his love for Jonathan and he transmitted that intergenerationally to Jonathan's son. And who knows how many people benefited in future generations because of that. And that's the same thing, that's the same way the gospel came into my life. And we went back up a generation and we went down a generation. My parents and my children, 3 generations. Because of God's kindness. So, how does chesed point us to Christ? For God so loved the world. He so cheseded the world. He agaped the world. He loved the world so much that he sent his only son. And so God's extreme act of unrequested, unrequired, unmerited, undeserved, unilateral, unconditional, inexplicable kindness is Mel Gibson's Passion. When you think about Mel Gibson giving us a movie, basically taking a man and spending 2 hours beating him to death. That's basically what the movie does. And that's an act of chesed. And so the big idea today, and we see this in David, chesed have I received, chesed will I give. That was David's attitude. That's the thing that he does in this passage. He had received this incredible loving kindness from God, and he just could not contain himself, but to give it away to Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. And that's the big idea for us as well. So, how do we practice this? Hesed? How do we practice that? Give you a couple of thoughts you can think about this week. Number one, it might be good, if you wanted to just spend some time recalling God's chesed to you. Like I did this week. Honestly, my circumstances have not changed, but my perspective has. My circumstances haven't changed, but my perspective has, just by simply recalling all of God's loving kindness to me already. And then the second thing on the practice of this kindness is maybe to find someone who's crippled. You know, if you're doing okay, maybe you're the cripple, maybe you need it. But if you're doing okay, find someone else who needs some of God's kindness. Preferably someone who can do nothing for you in return. If they're not someone who's not a believer, share the John 3:16 with them. Share the ultimate gift of God's kindness. That God is not willing that any would perish, but that all would come to repentance. Share your faith with them. Or if they're a believer and they need a word of encouragement, figure out what it is. And then do some unexpected, unrequired, undeserved, extreme kindness to them. Hesed have I received, chesed will I give. Say that with me. Chesed I have received, chesed will I give. Let's pray. Our dearest Father, we are so aware that we are like dead dogs and crippled, and that you have extended such loving kindness to us, and it has pointed us to Christ, and we want to point others to Christ, and we want to be encouraged, and some of us need that, and some of us are ready to encourage others. So I pray, Father, that you would just superintend your holy word to each of our hearts this morning as we seek to be men who follow Jesus, men who are disciples. In Jesus' name, amen.